Today is actually going to be a bit different to one of my normal videos. I'm going to be looking at a camera that I've been very excited for over the last couple of weeks. It was made possible by the sponsor of this video, Panasonic. They reached out to me and they wanted to know if I would be a part of their Shot in My World campaign. They wanted to see what I could do with this new camera. And so, just through transparency, they sent me one of their new Panasonic S5s, which is actually going to be the topic of today's video, the Panasonic S5. Over the course of this video, I'd like to go into a few things about the camera, mainly just talking about my experiences. This isn't going to be as much a review of the camera as my thoughts on it and what kind of a tool it will be for me when it comes to filmmaking. During the review, I'm going to be looking at a few different use cases that I've been using it with. So when I first got the camera, I used it with the kit lens and I took my dog for a walk. We just filmed some of that. So that was basically just like playing around with the camera a little bit, just getting my first thoughts about it. Then I took it out to a documentary shoot where we didn't do much documentary work, but it was more like a studio environment. We shot a beginning of a documentary that I've been filming over the last few weeks, or few months. And then the last one is I want to talk some more about the video that I shot in London, the city lights video. So I think the main features of this camera, I think, are going to be really kind of like a game changer when it comes to the form factor and sensor size that they've enabled in this camera. It shoots 10-bit 422 4K. That footage is downsampled from a 6K sensor, so it's a lot sharper than you would have for a normal 4K image if you were to use native pixels. And alongside that, you're able to enable 14 stops of dynamic range with the V-log, the full V-log gamma curve that you're able to use. It's a picture profile. This is a feature that you would have to pay for. I paid for it when I had my GH5. The reason being is because it was developed for the VeriCam cinema camera, which is the Panasonic's cinema line of cameras. And so you've got the same gamma profile that they use for professional feature films. And they've put it into this S5, this full frame camera. And so the image you get from it is absolutely astonishing. I'm using the Vlog right now and I'll show you what it looks like before and after. It's incredibly flat and really retains so much detail. The other benefit of having that log profile is being able to really change your image in the way that you want it to. So what I do is I use the provided 709 lookup table that Panasonic provides on their website, and I use that and I change the image from there. So you can have the log profile, retain all of that dynamic range, and go straight to a 709 profile. Without loss of image quality whatsoever. This being the full V-log that you'd find on cinema cameras really means that you maintain so much more detail and so much more dynamic range. So I'm able to change the image in so many different ways And this is the main way that I shoot with this camera. That alongside the 10-bit color means that you have so much more flexibility when it comes to skies and any high dynamic range scenes. So color grading, maintaining a HDR image, and having just a clean overall image, just to start off with, is really great for a very fast and easy to work with workflow. And so that's one of the main things I really like about the new sensor, or the new image that you get from the S5. I think that's something important to really recognize in a camera like this. Having such a high dynamic range image with making it clean and high bit depth as well, because I think it records 150 megabits per second in the 4K mode, and it really does make for a clean image. And I think it's important to not understate how good the image is, where this is going to be the main, for most people at least for me, it's going to be the main mode that you're going to be shooting in, at least in a documentary or a feature film environment. I think it works very well, and it's very comparable to other cinema cameras that I've used in the past. And so if you pair that with a lot of the features that the S5 uses for things like focus peaking, zebras, histograms, just to make sure you're exposing your image correctly and you're able to get critical focus, that is a very powerful combination for cinema and videography use. And so I'm very happy with how it looks. Another feature that you find on the GH5 that this S5 has inherited is the 4K 60. It is slightly different. There's a slight crop in it, but you're able to get it in 10-bit rather than 8-bit in the GH5. And so the image is very flexible. So having that in 4K 60, having a slow motion image that looks just as good as the 422 10-bit 4K, I think that is really incredible. And so a lot of the footage I took in London was actually in that mode, and I think it looks fantastic, really. I would like it to be full frame, but that's just nitpicking a little bit. Having that crop means that you aren't able to fully utilize a lot of the full frame lenses that you'll be using on the S5. And so that is something I'd like to see change, but it's not essential to use the camera. Speaking of other slow motion modes, you're able to record 1080p up to 180 frames per second. And for a lot of use cases, I think that'll be fine, especially if you're using the camera to produce content for smaller devices like tablets or phones, if that's where the media will be mostly consumed. I did shoot some images in 180 frames per second, as well as 100 frames per second. I prefer the look of 100 frames per second over the 180, because there is a slight crop when you go to 180, but the image looks fine. I took a small clip of my cat trying to catch a fly, and you can see how that turned out. Something else that I wanted to really talk about and make sure I get across is how kind of incredible it is to have this full frame sensor. Not only is it full frame that downsamples from a 24 megapixel image down to a 4K or a 6K image to a 4K image, but the sensor itself is stabilized. I believe it has 5 stops of stabilization. And so if you're doing a lot of photography, handheld work, then you'll have much better stabilization, just regardless of what lens you use. And so that's something that, if you're used to the GH5, you'll be very happy with this. I don't see many differences from the image that you find from this in terms of stabilization. I think it's very comparable to the GH5. It's also very similar to the S1H, which this camera is very comparable to as well. This kind of just seems like a baby brother to the S1H. It just doesn't have a few of the main features that the S1H has. However, there is a firmware update coming to this camera. So we're going to be getting, let me have a look. So at the end of this year, 2020, we will be getting 5.9K ProRes RAW out of the micro HDMI cable of this camera. That will be 12-bit 5.9K RAW to an external recorder, which I think is incredible. Having all of that power come out from the sensor, which is already pretty fantastic, 14 stops of dynamic range, image stabilized, downsampled, having all of that into a raw 12-bit image, I think is going to be incredible. And you're also going to get the full frame look that I think a lot of people really enjoy. The cinema market seems to be trending towards larger format, so anything larger than Super 35. And so I'm really glad to see that this camera, this budget cinema camera, is able to approach the same level as what these cinema cameras are producing. And I think if you were to put, because I think that's going to be a very similar image to the S1H, and how that has ProRes RAW. I think these use the same sensor. So the camera's twice the price of this. And so having the same or similar image to the S1H, and I've seen footage of that is very comparable to, some of the most high-end cinema cameras. And so that is something I'm very excited about. Anyway, let me tell you about the other parts of the update that will be coming along. So we get vector scopes, the master pedestal adjustments. I actually don't know what that is. We'll have a synchro scan option. So instead of viewing the ISO and the shutter speed in ISO and over second, so like 1/50th of a second, 1/100th of a second, we'll have shutter angle instead of shutter speed. And instead of ISO, it will be decibels, so dB. So that's just gain. So it's just putting the displays that you would see on a cinema camera in this camera. So if you are more inclined for video, then you can use those instead of photo all the time. And so it makes your life a bit easier when it comes to changing your exposure and keeping 180-degree rule, and making sure you're accurately exposed and things like that. So I'm excited to see those, but I think I'm mostly excited about to see the ProRes RAW update. I'm very excited about that. Something else that I wanted to talk about was the lens that you get with the camera. So when I first got the camera, I went out with my dog, like I said. We went to try the focus on this lens in the camera, and just to see if this lens was okay. And I am actually very, very impressed with this lens. So it is a 20 to 60 millimeter 3.5 to f5.6. Its construction is very good, but the focal length that it goes to, and how wide it goes to mainly, is just incredible in my opinion. I've not really used lenses wider than 24, so this lens that I'm filming at the moment is a 24 to 35, and previously the widest lens I've ever really had is a 24 to 70 equivalent. So having a 20 millimeter, well, I effectively have been using this as a prime lens ever since I got it. So having a 20 millimeter prime is very good as a kit lens. And you obviously had the capability of using this at 60 millimeters or anywhere in between, but having that wide angle and pretty fast 3.5 aperture, like that's not very far off from 2.8. Having that at your disposal is really handy. I used it quite a lot when I was in London. But the footage that I got when I was out with my dog, I really, really think that it turned out very well. The the lens especially, didn't have very much distortion, and it had you know, some pretty pleasing bokeh. But the ability to have the image stabilization with a wide angle lens like this, it means that you don't get a very shaky image, and you just capture so much. So I can see this being a really amazing travel lens for people who want to just take it out and go places. Maybe vlog a little bit with it too. You can use this lens for a lot of things when you have good light with it. So right now we're just going to do a bit of a vlog test. We're going to use the autofocus continuous mode to see how good the autofocus is. Now I'm going to use it in two modes. We're going to try it in Vlog, which, like I said, is the picture profile I shoot in most. And then we're also going to try it in a more contrasty, the standard profile, which I'm sure a lot more people would rather use. So this is Vlog. We'll put a lot on it afterwards and just do a basic color correction for it. And we're going to see how the autofocus continuous works. I have Haley here, so if I pull my dog along with, that's why. So if I get close, you can see, yep, it's got my eyes. So I'm going to just go back a bit. Does it still see me? Hey, come on. Yep, so I'm going to get closer. Hello. There you go. And over here. If I walk along like this, so you can still see me. And like this. So if I get closer. How's that doing? Yeah, pretty good. All right. Now I'm going to change the picture profile and we'll see how it works in another mode. Come on here. So now we've switched it to standard picture profile, and we're going to be walking around. So this is what it. Haley, come on. Come on. So this is what it would be like if I were to kind of start vlogging. The eye and the face detection seems to be working well. It's on my face at the moment, so if I hold it a bit further, it might have to change a little bit. And if I hold it closer, yeah, that's not so bad. So yeah, if you're kind of thinking of this camera for more vlogging, this might be a decent setup because we're using the in-body image stabilization because the lens doesn't have IS. If you wanted to use a lens that does have IS, you get even better improved stabilization as well. So I think it goes up to 6.5 stops of stabilization. Yeah. And of course we've got the trains going past too. Yeah, so, and obviously we've got Haley. What happens if we point over her? There you go. Hi Haley. Cool. Right, so that's it for this test. Back to me in my studio. Back to the studio. Yeah, that works pretty well. When I was using the S5 in London, it was a very, very wet day. It was halfway or midway between Storm Alex being here, and I think he's still here really. So it got quite overcast and the whole day wasn't all that bright. And it got towards the end of the day and I was about to go home when I was on the South Bank, and I remember there was this, I saw there was this skateboarding rink, and like, it's on the South Bank, it's quite famous. So, but the only thing is, I only really had this lens and this lens. So the most zoomed in I could get was, I either have to get like right up close to them, which I wasn't really comfortable with, or I could just shoot from afar at 60mm. And this is only a 5.6 aperture. So I was like, okay, how about we try out the dual native ISO that this camera has. So the ISOs go from 640 to, well, the native ISOs are 640 to 4000. And I wanted to see how it worked. And I understood that the full frame sensor would mean that the low light capabilities would be much better as well. That's just the nature of full frame, especially compared to what I was used to, which was Micro Four Thirds, which I typically wouldn't go above 400, which is the native ISO. If I had to push it, it would be maybe 1600. That would be the highest I'd go to. So 4000, I'd never really experienced much because I just chose not to use it. 4000 is quite bright. And so I was able to use this 5.6 aperture lens at 4000 ISO in a lower light situation, no problem. And I was really surprised that it was able to work like that, because like I've never really experienced that before. Maybe I'm just surprised, and maybe you guys have been doing that all your lives. But I was just surprised about how clean an image you can get at 4000 ISO. It was extremely similar to be filming in 640. So I actually did a test to see what the difference was between 640 and 4000 ISO. And I'll let you decide, I'll let you have a look right now, which one of these is 640 and then which one of these is 4000. Let you have a look. Okay, cool. So this one is 640 and this one is 4000. And I was just surprised. I didn't realize that they were so similar. Now, I think there is a bit less noise in 640 compared to 4000, which you'd expect. But the fact that there is so little difference and that they could potentially be used interchangeably when you need to have a low light image or a lower light situation. So, I do a lot of documentary work. So having that ability to, instead of using 3200 ISO and have a noisy image, I could push it to 4000 ISO and, just turn my aperture down a little bit. I really appreciate having that kind of flexibility. And I can use slower lenses like this and still get a good image when I need to, which, yeah, I'm very happy with. So I did want to touch on something very quickly. This, of course, is a hybrid mirrorless camera. And so you can take some amazing stills as well as great video. And so I've taken a couple of photos with it and I'm very happy with the images that you can get out of it. I really like the full frame look, and I think most photographers really only want to take full frame images. And so I think it does very well in that aspect. The skin tones that you get, the resolution of it all, it's more than capable of producing some fantastic images. I've not used it in a studio environment, but the images I have taken are very clear and crisp. There is a feature that I wanted to tell you about, is the high resolution modes. So essentially what this camera does is it moves the sensor around ever so slightly, pixel by pixel. So natively it has a 24 megapixel sensor. And so by moving the sensor around just a tiny bit, you can get images, it can compile images that are 45 and 96 megapixels in size. Now you can get JPEGs and RAW from the image, from the sensor straight onto your SD card, so you can play with them around later. So I did a comparison between the 24, the 44, and the 96 megapixel sensor modes. And you can see that the 96 megapixel mode is incredibly sharp. 44 megapixels is as well, and there is quite a big difference. So if you are going to want to use a high resolution mode, this is fantastic for that. I did use those on a tripod. I tried them out handheld as well, because obviously you want to be able to use it handheld. You want to take portraits of people at 96 megapixels. And it doesn't work as well. It does work for the most part. The 44 megapixel mode works much better handheld. But for both of them, when you are doing it handheld, you do get a bit of compression artifacting, and there's like a bit of a color shift as well. So if my recommendation is to use it on a tripod, because it will work fantastically. You obviously can't take pictures of incredibly fast moving images. You can't use this for sports and wildlife photography, but for landscapes it will be fantastic. I'd like to try and use it for time-lapse photography. I did try and use it in conjunction with the time-lapse mode on this camera, but unfortunately they don't work together. But I might be able to get around that by using an intervalometer. We'll have to try that another time. So in terms of recording modes, I should just say, because I've had to restart the recording of this, at 4K 10-bit, there is a 30-minute recording time limit. However, you can get around this by just recording 4K and 8-bit. It's amazing because they've actually made the capability for, if you needed to record for a long time, pretty much indefinitely, you're able to use the USB-C port on the side. You can use the USB-C port on the side of the camera to actually power the camera while it's on. And because it has dual card slots, which can do relay recording, once an SD card becomes full, you can take one out as the other one's recording. And then once that's finished, you can take that one out and you can basically indefinitely record by replacing each SD card, whilst the battery bank or external power supply powers the camera through the USB-C. So you can record indefinitely on this camera. Well, indefinitely. I'm sure it doesn't do it for months and months. But yeah, that's something I was very surprised with. The only thing is, in 10-bit, you do have a 30-minute record time. I would like to see that improved upon, because I just don't think it's a very good thing to have to restart your recording. If it's something that you have no control over, then there's nothing you can do. You can have a few moments where there's no footage, and if you're trying to do an interview, then you have like synchronization issues. So yeah, you can get around that just by not recording in 10-bit, but I do like recording in 10-bit. You know, you get the best image out of the camera, and so yeah, that's the only downside to that. But you know, unlimited recording is there, and that's very good. It's just me being nitpicky around 10-bit. So yeah, that's the only downside about that. I didn't do very many tests when it comes to skin tones, although I am being filmed on the S5 right now. So, you know, this is what I look like. I'm a pretty pale skin kind of person, so if it's not very saturated, it's not the camera. I just haven't been on holiday in a long time, so, and it's pretty rainy outside anyway, so I'm not going to go outside anytime soon. But that's not to do with the camera, that's me, that's just me. So I just wanted to reassure you guys that the colors coming from this camera are absolutely fine. I think the skin tones work really well, and compared to other cameras, I actually think they're pretty good, especially with the high dynamic range that you see. It makes it look much more filmic. Something I really like about Panasonic cameras is that they seem to think about all of the little things that you might not even really realize. For example, one of the things I think is really quite cool, on top of the camera, each of the buttons are actually very different. So if you're in a position like I am at the moment where I can't actually see the top of the camera, they've made it so you can identify which one of the buttons you're pressing or you're touching. You can identify them based on each trait that they have. Sounds strange, but for example, on the top of the camera it has white balance, ISO, and exposure compensation. Each of these buttons are very different. So the white balance is a larger, rounder, tactile button. The second one is I believe it's the ISO, which has more of like an indent on it, or the opposite of an indent, more like braille, in that when you touch it, it's got two little dots on it. So you can identify that that's ISO from those dots. And then you have your exposure compensation, which is much smaller. So if you go along and you put your finger above all of them, then you're able to identify which ones are which based on, well, obviously which position they're in, but also which one you're touching. So because they all feel very different. And the same goes with the record button, which is a bit more loose, and so you can touch it in different ways. It's also bigger. So yeah, small things like that I kind of really like about Panasonic. I find the usability of the camera is very good. Something I've not talked about yet is the screen that I'm looking at the moment. It is extremely bright. I think it might be the brightest screen I've seen on any camera. My brother even commented to me when we were out shooting when I'm walking the dog. And he was saying, oh, that's incredibly bright. There was bright daylight, and we had, you know, it was quite a bright day, and you can still see every little bit of detail in the image. And the same goes for I was recording the screen with my phone, and you can still see everything perfectly clearly, even on a bright day. And so I'm very impressed with that. The viewfinder isn't as good as the screen, but I think the screen does make up for it in some ways. It's a lower resolution than the GH5, but it still is very usable, especially in bright daylights. But like I say, the screen is very usable too. I feel like I use them both, and they're both very usable. But like I say, the screen is amazing. There's also like features like it has a border around the edge of the screen. It's like an indicator to show you that you're recording. Not only that, it has like a red dot. It has a red dot on the screen to show you that you're recording, and it has on the back of the camera a little flashing light when you're recording as well, just so you can tell like a bit like a tally light, but just so you can tell that you're definitely recording. So just talking about the images that you're able to get from this camera, and based off of the shoots that I've done already, I'm just extremely impressed with how capable this camera is in its most basic modes. It has some bells and whistles like the 180 frames per second slow motion, like the 60 frames per second in 4K, but there's just the usability of it all. Things like the image stabilization, the full frame sensor downsampled from 6K to 4K, the dual gain ISO. These are all just little things that add up to make a really nice image. It means that you can really take this to so many different use cases, and it means that you're able to really rely on this camera to do the most basic thing the best way possible. Is to have, the highest dynamic range, 14 stops with Vlog, high data rates, 150 megabits per second, high resolution, 4K, all in a package that enables you to shoot basically anywhere for however long you want, onto cheap media. And I think it's excellent. And in the future, when we have that 5.9K RAW, the 12-bit RAW, out of the HDMI onto an external recorder, that in combination with Vlog and the downsampled it will be a 6K image, and being able to downsample that on a full frame sensor which is stabilized. There are just all these small features that Panasonic have really put into this camera to make it so filmmakers feel comfortable filming in so many different situations, and so this camera can be used in so many different scenarios, and I think that it's excellent. And the images that I've got from it already, so the main ones being in London, and for the documentary shoot, they are vibrant, they are very clean, and I've had no problems with grading them or even viewing them. So overall, I'm just very happy with the images that you can get out of this camera. They are very, very clean images with loads of dynamic range. The Vlog that you normally get, the full Vlog that you normally get in the VariCam cinema cameras, the same gamma color science that you would find in those cameras, they've managed to implement into this very cheap entry-level professional camera. Full frame, image stabilized, and it's got so many different features that enable you to get a nice image, a very basic starting point, so you can grade it and change the image exactly how you want it to be. And I just think that's incredible, really. And so yeah, I'm just very happy with it. I can't really recommend this camera enough. I didn't go into all of the specs and all of the bells and whistles that this camera can do. And so that's pretty much all I have to say about the S5. There's so many more things that it can do that I didn't touch on, but I'll leave the product page in the description of this video. I'll also leave a link so you can buy the camera if you feel so inclined to buy it as well. Yeah, so if you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments of this video. I'd love to hear back from you guys to see what your thoughts are. And yeah, thank you for watching. Bye.